on today's show.
I go into my office, I close the door. It sort of looked like the office we're in right now. And I was like, fuck. I didn't even know what to do. It's like, what's the first step? There's the satellites, there's the technology, there's the content, like there's the receivers, like just everything had to be dealt with from scratch. And I had one of my old roommates from New York worked at Atlantic Records, and she was also one of my best friends. And I was like, well, we need content. Let me just start there. And called her. And then, one thing led to another. And within a year and a half, had done some of the first digital content licensing deals ever, right? Well, the first one was with Michael Bloomberg himself. The second one was with Phil Kent, who at the time was head of CNN International out of London, but then went on to become head of all of, I think, Turner or whatever. A couple of years later, I was like, briefing Richard Branson and others on this new technology. I would be in Toulouse in like a big hangar with Jean-Francois Gambert of Alcatel, like going through where we were with the satellites. I mean, it was just crazy. It all managed to work itself out because each point along the way, one story at a time, believers came in to play. And then, I had the wisdom of the world at my fingertips.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Creator Institute podcast. Your host, Erin Koester.
Welcome to today's show. On today's show, we're going to be hanging out in the studio with Tiffany Norwood, and Tiffany truly is a force of nature. She is someone who exudes energy, and I would have to tell you, I got fired up talking to her. Her story is really one of those stories that I think it is inspiring to everyone. She was a female engineer, and when there weren't a lot of them, in fact, and she sort of leveraged that knowledge and thinking to kind of combine creativity, engineering, and truly business to become just sort of a force in the early internet age, raising over $700 million for the first satellite company that was doing sort of XM radio. And so that sort of set her up on a path where she has been just a dominator out there in the world, doing things in business and communication. And today, she's now working on sort of a new approach where she has been creating, in some ways, an event series designed to inspire creativity, to get people excited. And I think that role in Tribaton is really one of those things that's allowed her to sort of take a new approach to creation, a new approach to communication engagement. And this is that creation event. It's one part rock and roll show, one part church service, all those things rolled into one. That's something powerful. But I think she continues to find ways to create, to stand out, to be different, and to get her message of hope, of positivity, and of unlocking that inner innovator inside all of us. Tiffany is someone who has studied at some of the best schools and now is someone who's bringing that message to everyone to find their entrepreneurial skill set. And you're going to find in this conversation, it'll definitely fire you up a little bit. Tiffany Norwood, everyone, enjoy the show. Awesome to have you here, number one. I think it's fun.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
It is, yeah. I think it's great. We talked about this. We've sort of crossed paths over the last few years, and I think what's been interesting to kind of, for me, as following your journey, is I see you probably like ahead of where a lot of people are in terms of this world out there of innovation, and you've had fascinating adventures. But it's almost like there's been this shift that's happened, that you caught wind of it early, and that is kind of like the people center of innovation, right? There's we have this fascination with Apple, and everyone talks about Amazon and
or the technology,
or the technology or whatever it is. But like, I love that you're fascinated with like the person who creates that first spark, the Bezoses, the Blakeleys, the Jobs, the Benioffs, or just the people who are kind of like innovating in their day-to-day life, and they're, the artist or whoever it is. So tell me a little bit about this sort of premise that you have, which is kind of the individual as the center of the innovation world, and kind of how it's playing out in your life these days. Because I think, again, I think it's sort of kind of the wave is coming, and you've kind of been at the early parts of it, but it's starting to crest a little bit. So start there, maybe a little bit about people at the center of this.
Okay, so I mean, this has been my life, Eric, and thank God. People can't see me on this podcast, but I'm a Black woman, and I was born in the late 60s. And so, I had so many different dreams and things I imagined doing in my life that weren't reinforced by society. So it actually started as far as me being ahead of this, like in the 70s when I was a kid, which was having this strong feeling and then testing it, because I've always been sort of scientific method as a kid, that everything starts in the imagination and that the imagination creates reality, and that the imagination is a way, to me, that God sort of prays to you, or the universe prays to you. So from that, I crafted and innovated this amazing life as for anyone, right? But especially as a Black woman who was born when Martin Luther King was still alive. So, I've been to 52 countries, a lot of times as an entrepreneur or innovator. I've done 7 startups. I've had 2 IPOs, including a company called WorldSpace and XM Radio, which everyone knows. I got my first patent at 22. I was one of the creators of the first one-strap backpack. And so all my life, I've been sort of capturing.
You're like the Forrest Gump of tech awesomeness, right?
Cuter.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, definitely cuter.
You meant that, right?
Yeah, I totally meant that one. Yeah.
And so it's been this lifelong pursuit, both as far as this algorithm of turning imagination into reality, and also practicing innovating everything and anything I can get my hands on, from myself to my school to my community to a technology.
Yeah, and so you there's an article that I was researching. There's an article that you wrote something that I think was really interesting, and I'll just give you the last part of it in this quote that I thought was instructive, and I'd just like to hear you rap on it a little bit. It said, "I wanted you to know that I'm a very objective person who also believes in magic." And so, unpack that a little bit, because I think that's like a really interesting way to think about it, because it is this, you use words like imagine and, imagination and magic and things like that to describe sort of this world, but you're also you're like data driven as they come. You have all these pieces. So tell me how you reconcile those pieces of believing in magic while also being someone who's super, super data driven at the same time.
Well, I don't feel that they're in conflict of each other. So, if you start with the premise that they're not, then it becomes much easier to reconcile. So then it becomes, verifying and testing like any sort of hypothesis. And as I said, it's been a lifelong pursuit for me, which means that, I've tried to break it in a variety of different ways. And it's not the only hypothesis I have. I also have this whole hypothesis around aging that we can talk about on another podcast that my friends thought I was kooky with, until now, with all of us in our 50s. We look very different, and they were like, "What were you talking about?" I'm like, "Too late now."
Yeah, exactly.
I tested a lot. So, as far as being having a data-driven background, what you're referencing is that I went to Cornell, electrical engineering, economics, statistics. Also went to
classic
Harvard.
Nerd. Yeah,
Harvard Business School.
Right.
I'm a coder. I do a lot of coding, and so very objective. And because I've been pro-imagination my whole life, I would come up with these big dreams, and then basically using the framework that I now talk about around the world, see if I could manifest them. And the crazier and the bigger they are, the better. It's sort of like what I felt Da Vinci was doing his whole life, and I was very obsessed with him and sort of Einstein and Harriet Tubman when I was growing up, and God. It's this weird dynamic, right? And so I'll give you an example. I originally self-taught myself to code, and from that matriculated into Cornell College of Engineering in 1985, electrical engineering, computer science major. And, a key part of the framework, the first 2 steps, is around your dream, like what do you want? So I was very clear on what I wanted. I started even down to it's Cornell and it's, whatever. Because from there, I was going to go to Cornell Med School and be an OBGYN. Don't ask me why. Right?
It's funny. I wanted to be a doctor as well. It's this funny thing. Like, there is a lot of people, it feels like, especially, that's the path. You go and I'm going to become a doctor, right? Like, that's sort of just what it is. Whereas to your point, right? It's partially because I don't think we are able to imagine what's possible besides this. Like that looks successful versus like what else does success look like? And I think today maybe things are different, but there's a lot of people I think who have that crazy.
A little bit crazier than that. As in, I also was going to do technology. I was also going to do startups and business. I'd already had a business in high school that did really well. I was also going to travel the world, and I was also going to be a musician. Out of all those things, you know, like med school was the hardest. So it drove med school and sort of like I wanted formal tech training. Like I needed a school that, you know, encompassed all of that.
Sure.
And also my primary major, and then I wanted to do business. So basically what I'm saying is if I was born of another generation, they would have been like ADD, right? but when I was growing up, it was considered more like being a polymath or having multiple interests, and they supported it. And I wanted a university that supported it. So like the first two elements, as I was mentioning, the framework is taking your imagination very seriously, the dream, and then the very next step is crafting a story. So I've always been a storyteller. It's even easier when you're a kid. It's sort of a natural thing.
Right.
And so the way that looked, you know, say with the dream of Cornell, and that was an innovation back then because few people code it. Few women code it, few blacks code it, few black women code it, right? So it was, everyone's like, people didn't have computers, that sort of stuff. And so what that looked like was, you know, when I would talk to people about, I want to study computer science, I want to code, I want to like go to Cornell and da-da-da. It's like, are you sure? You know, this, that. And so the story, and I talk about this in framework, that there's 3 primary universal languages of influence and persuasion, and that's conviction, like expressing in words and action how much it means to you. Objectivity, so like facts, data, pictures, videos, prototypes, right? Like something anchored in the real world is not enough that you really want it, right? Or you like it. And then grace, like this aspect of being of service to others or the community or whatever. So what that looked like for this was, you know, I'm going to Cornell. I'm only going to apply to Cornell. College of Engineering, computer science major. So if you could help me, I would really appreciate it.
All the chips in one basket here, right?
and I want to go there and do that because I have these dreams of this, that, this, and that. And I'm literally going to travel and change the world. And then the response became different, the help, like, because, you know, remember, we didn't have Google. Like, I was lucky that I lived in DC, so the Library of Congress was Google, but then it led to the Believers collaboration and then an active maintenance of faith. And so, you know, going back to your question around, like, that perspective and sort of being ahead of the curve with it, and you were thinking more in recent times, it's actually been like a lifelong thing, and that, you know, being data driven, I constantly test it and then constantly like refine it. You know, I've even used it to manifest a dream around climbing to the top of Mount Etna and looking in. Which I wouldn't recommend to your listeners because it's actually not legal to do, but you know, if you've ever read Journey to the Center of the Earth, I was like, well, let's see if I could do something really outrageous and basically still using that same framework with really bad Italian. I did it with a friend. So yeah, I've tested it not just in startups, but in everything.
That's awesome. One of the things I also think is when I asked someone about you, and I can't remember. Yeah, I know. No, it was good, but it was that you were described as the ultimate convener. In kind of a way that one of your magics is being able to bring people together. We were just talking before about this kind of concept of creating events around people, bringing people together. Tell me a little bit about the kind of like that sort of skill of like, because there's something really interesting. You know, we talk about one of the powers of creating things like books or podcasts or events is that the magic of it really is not that you create that thing, but that you bring people together in that journey. The people you interview for the book, or the people that you interview on your podcast, or the people that you like. This is an aspect of collaboration because the two of us together are doing something that hopefully will have an impact, like that kind of 1 + 1 = 1 = 10 kind of idea. And I think you're doing that now with kind of these sort of like with some of the stuff that you're doing. You even list in your framework the concept of attract your tribe and then collaborate, right? It's like, it's funny, I was going to ask this question. I was like, hadn't actually seen that connection there. But tell me a little bit about that. Like, that is a thing that's important to you. And then maybe talk a little bit about how you're seeing that play out in this event, sort of like this, this global domination event sort of thing that's happening in your life today.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, to me, like, if you believe in other people and believe in the connection between other people, you're a billionaire. And part of what I talk about, when I speak around the world about the framework, and in particular, this piece I called The Power of We, I talk about the faith as a currency and the currency of faith and connection. And again, spiritual belief is optional, but it's been very important to me. But the baseline requirements, like any good scientist, is that one, you believe we are connected somehow in the world, even if it's a great mystery. And two, that you believe in others to show up when you need them and how you need them. Maybe not precisely the exact second, but that if you do your part and keep moving forward, even if you have no idea how to do it well and or you're really scared, that people will show up to help you. And so because that's been so key for me and part of this, algorithm, so to speak, it means that in my life to make these things happen, I've had to rely on others many times when I had the first dream of it or the first story of it or the first step of it. I did not know those people or where they exist in the world. I just know that they existed and that eventually they would show up. And they have. And so, and when I say like big, crazy things, there's the Mount Etna, thing, which, I had, it ended up being the equivalent of park rangers.
Really?
Yeah, which is why you cannot assume who the believers are. Because if I was being too logical, I would have hid from them because there were signs like you can't, go past this line or whatever. Or like when I was in my 20s, I raised nearly $700 million to, build 3 satellites. And we also invested in MP3 and some other things to sort of bring in the beginning of this whole digital media wave that started in the 90s. And when I did that, the startup before, I'd raised $5,000. Right? So it was a huge gap, but the process was the same.
Right.
And then, I was like, first I need some solid believers to then, and then, also part of the arrangement when I first spoke to Noah Samara, who was the original dreamer of the idea, I was like, if I do this, I want to be head of international business development, at 27. And this is before Zuckerberg or any of them. And I looked even younger than that. And he was like, look, if you raise that money, I've been trying for 2 years. You can do anything you like. But the reality is sometimes, be careful with what you wish for, because sort of the first day that I was officially a part of the team. So we went from 5 people. By the time I joined officially, it was, 15 or so, and everyone was like, well done. I go into my office, I close the door. It sort of looked like the office we're in right now. And I was like, fuck, I didn't even know what to do. It's like, what's the first step? There's the satellites, there's the technology, there's the content, there's the receivers, just everything had to be dealt with from scratch. And I had one of my old roommates from New York worked at Atlantic Records, and she was also one of my best friends. And I was like, well, we need content. Let me just start there.
Right.
And called her. And then, one thing led to another. And within a year and a half, had done some of the first digital content licensing deals ever, right? Well, the first one was with Michael Bloomberg himself. The second one was with Phil Kent, who at the time was head of CNN International out of London, but then went on to become head of all of, I think, Turner or whatever. A couple of years later, I was briefing Richard Branson and others on this new technology. I would be in Toulouse in a big hangar with Jean-François Francois Gambert of Alcatel, like going through where we were with the satellites. I mean, it was just crazy. It all managed to work itself out because each point along the way, one story at a time, believers came in to play, and then, you know, I had the wisdom of the world at my fingertips. Right. So it's more that than say, like, I wouldn't say I'm a big extrovert or do well in like huge crowds or like a football tailgating party.
So you know, part of the magic of that is like, so take a not you and put them in that situation, is that your ability to sort of like tell stories about the future, right? This sort of, because I think there's always a set of people that are really good at taking these unknown unknowns and turning them into sort of like something that we can appreciate and understand. How did the storytelling part of this develop for you? Because I think that, you know, again, knowing you, I would say, like, it wasn't just that like things worked out that you got believers at the right time. You sort of converted people who were like maybe on the fence into believers a little bit. So how did you develop that storytelling skill? And then, and at the same token, like, how do you teach others how to become better storytellers today? Because I do think that's one of the things that I've learned is the hardest in turning someone into an author or a podcaster, is getting them to believe that they can take facts that they hear and tell a story. Because I think it might be the biggest superpower that...
It is the biggest superpower. And I'll tell you this, Eric, and thank you for recognizing it, because for years and years and years, at first entrepreneurship wasn't cool, right?
Totally.
So, you know,
you were poor.
So as I was doing these things as a kid, you know, I had this business in high school too, and then I was also a student entrepreneur, and you know, so, and eventually, you know, entrepreneurship started getting cool, and then there were these programs on it and classes and whatever, but I didn't have that.
Yeah.
You know, when
I didn't have that. Like, this is a true story. When I had a business when I was in high school and college that was making real money, like to the point where, like, I was making, I don't remember what it was, like $40,000-$50,000 a year off this thing,
solid,
which is great, right? It was amazing. And then, you know, and then I go to my career counselor, my college career counselor, and this is, so I'm 41, so that was what, so it was like 99-ish or so, 98, 99-ish, and I was like, hey, so what do I do? Like, where am I? And I was like, I got this. I sort of give them the inventory. I got this business here that's doing this stuff. I could probably like keep doing that, make some more money. And they're like, oh, like, you don't want to do that. Like, get a real job. You went to college to get a job. And I was like, oh, okay, this is true. I mean, I had this business that was making money. I took a job at $22,000 a year.
Makes no sense.
Makes no sense, right?
Makes no sense,
like,
Eric.
But that's like everyone told us, is that like, this isn't a thing. Like, you go to college so that you don't have to like do that slumming it entrepreneurship stuff. And like, you know, and it was weird. I mean, I was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so it sort of didn't really matter that much. Like, no one knew it, but like, there was like magical stuff going on, and yet not everyone had access to it. And so anyway, best laid plans, but there's me, my dumbass, shutting my company down to go do it.
But I mean, look at you now. Every practice counts,
yes.
And we talk about that a lot in our framework, the cycle of practices, right?
It's why I teach, though, I have to say, is because I think that there's a lot of people, and it's actually what led me to move from teaching entrepreneurship into creation. Like, you know, my world is about teaching creation, because I think that people need these gateway creation experiences that lead them into the next things, right?
Like some practice. So it's the same thing as like what you did in high school, what I did in, you know, elementary school, the lemonade stand even counts. So you just keep expanding upon it. And so, you know, to that point, like in the 80s, when I was doing my startup in college that we filed the patent for, you can imagine if you went through it in 99, this is like 83, 84, 85, 87 or so. And literally 85 was the year that we started entrepreneurship at Cornell, and I was the original cohort.
That's crazy.
And it was just like very grassroots, but Cornell was very ahead of
that's early, because I was in college in 99, and I don't think there was a entrepreneurship. It definitely wasn't a normal thing, but I don't even think it was like an opportunity you could do.
I mean, it was very grassroots, but it was real, right? And we would do all this stuff. But the key thing is that it was more of a convening and almost a support group than any sort of, because everyone was attacking us and telling us to get real jobs, especially with Cornell, and especially all the debt and whatever.
I'm Tiffany, and I'm an aspiring entrepreneur.
Yeah. And I will also say, we just did what worked.
Right.
So there was nothing about pitches or whatever. I very quickly
There's no business plans. Like that's not a thing either. Yeah.
We did what we needed to do as far as a plan, because I do believe in planning on paper, but not spending months and months and months at it. Like it was definitely the reward, both the business and market reward, as well as the personal satisfaction, was getting the first version out to the market, where even if it was like 1 or 2 or 3 other people that weren't a part of your company were using it, right? And then you would keep refining from there. What it also meant was that, because we didn't have anything, or we were taught to pitch, or we were just doing whatever worked and getting better at whatever worked, a storytelling part was very obvious, as I said, even when I was younger. I also had a big ticket scalping business in high school because I was a musician too.
Yeah.
We would make thousands of dollars off concerts, and this is like in the early 80s.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Even now
That's
in
like
high school. Yeah.
Hustling money though, right? Like
Yeah,
it's like
right?
what people don't realize is like that's where a lot of these, it's like, and again, you never thought of it as a business. It was just a way
I
to make
did.
money, right? Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I always thought of those things as like, those are just ways, because I had these businesses, I just thought they were ways to make money that were better than other things that people made money at. I never was like, oh, I'm starting a business. I was like, I'm just making money.
Yeah.
And like other people have to do like work at places. I'll just make money this way.
And to me, it's starting businesses are about doing things that you love and that other people love. So I never thought of that in conflict either. I thought all that can be all one the same. It's like a requirement. And so I have to do a lot of storytelling with that, because also my parents would have to like write letters saying, oh, that we couldn't go to school today, but not for what it really was, which is that we were standing in line outside of Hex to get tickets for the Police Synchronicity concert or whatever. And so that storytelling, no matter what it was that I was doing, it was of extreme benefit and had like an extreme return on investment. So as a result, I just kept using it more and more and more. And I did, and I am, this is one thing, there's like a couple of things that I think I'm world class at. And one of them is as a storyteller. And the type of storyteller that is important for innovator and entrepreneur. So there's a lot of different type of storytellers. Like there are people that report or deliver information or entertain. Entrepreneurs are storytellers for influence to action, such as to get investors or customers or partners or someone to join their team or tribe. That type of storyteller, I am best in class at. And I would say that
There's 700 million reasons why.
700 million reasons why, right? And I would say that for anyone that's looking to be an entrepreneur or a creator or an innovator, because storytelling is so important, there are things that, as I got older as an entrepreneur, in quotes, sort of like in my mid-20s, late 20s, like as I was coming in this experience with WorldSpace and XM Radio, and the stakes were so high, like I took improv classes and creative writing classes. It never once crossed my mind to do this thing called a pitch. And then when I start hearing them and having to judge them, I would be like, whoa, no.
You need to take an improv class.
Yeah. Like those or creative writing,
Right.
like to be able to express it in writing is equally as important. And that's a lot, more relevant to being an entrepreneur than, say taking a pitch class per se. I hope you don't teach a pitch class.
No, well, I mean, like I said, it's a funny thing, right? Like I get a fair number of people who are like aspirational entrepreneurs, and there's this question of like, well, why should I take your class and do a book or do a podcast? And I'm like, listen, I will tell you what, like you will actually learn how to see stories, because I think that's the first part of it. You have to like see stuff going on and be like, there's a story in here I could extract, and then be able to like understand how to package it and be able to tell it. Because I think those are like all separate pieces of it. To be world class, you sort of have to be able to recognize that there's a story here to be told, to be able to pull the information and sort of like say, okay, I got all the stuff that I need, and then to be able to tell it, those things. I think that like oftentimes people just assume that you stand up there and you start talking, and it's like, it's a real process, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. And so in my standpoint, I've actually sort of spent a lot of time teaching people both like how to pull the raw materials, how to like find a story framework, and then sort of like structure it, and then eventually they will learn. Like it's probably a little more natural for some people. But how do you tell someone who a younger Tiffany, how do you teach her to go?
How do I teach
how do you
someone
teach
to do
them to tell
storytelling?
stories?
So actually I do teach people to storytell. Like I have this workshop that's called Storytelling for Entrepreneurs and sort of Innovators, and it's subtitled, It's a Narrative, Not a Pitch. So one of the ways that I start is by saying, write it out as a story, as a narrative first, and it's the story of the successful future of whatever you imagine. Don't get into what could go wrong, but focus initially on what can go right. And then later, we go into refinement of anticipating what can go wrong and having the answer for it. But your first story, because I've always been predominantly an innovator, an inventor entrepreneur, frontier technology entrepreneur, being able to describe as a narrative what this thing is and how it will impact society or that person's life is truly important. The other thing is when I have people get up and practice it, I do not allow any PowerPoints. I'm like, it should stand on its own.
That's right.
The PowerPoint shouldn't be a crutch. If you have no time to do a PowerPoint, it should be okay. It should be that powerful as a narrative. And oh, by the way, a lot of things as far as big connections and finding my tribe or being able to go like 5 steps forward has happened not in front of a computer screen. So what, are you going to be screwed or fucked if you can't whip out your PowerPoint? Right. Also,
Jason Calacanis, he talks about, he wrote a book called Angel, I think is what it is. He's sort of a Silicon Valley investor. But he's one of the things that he described that I always find interesting in this concept of a pitch is he talks about most people act as a color commentator versus a play-by-play guy. So if you think about in sports, right, you have two people. One person is just like sort of telling you the story of what's going on, and there's the action is happening behind him, right? Like his or her voice is sort of the lead, and you basically talk about these sorts of things. Whereas the color commentator is like going and recapping and saying, you see here, right? Like they're pointing to the screen, they're doing circulars, where the play-by-play guy is like telling the story in richness so that you could have the screen off and still understand what's going on. So it's an interesting, I'd never heard anyone sort of describe it that way, but I think oftentimes what he would sort of say is most people act like color commentators, whereas most of us need to be play-by-play. And I was like, oh, that's kind of an interesting framework. I like it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it helps because I am a visual thinker. So when I'm describing stuff, I have a vision in mind. I also will work a lot with writing out the narrative and knowing it. But sort of getting back to teaching others, also I talk about the 3 universal languages of influence and connection, as I mentioned to you earlier, around the conviction, objectivity, and grace, because I've been 52 countries, some for holiday, but mainly most for creating and living and starting up stuff in together. And so, the idea of always having the luxury of doing a deep dive to understand your audience or access to a lot of the data that you have now wasn't there, but I still had to get the same results. So I started from the premise, but who knows with all the travel to space, that what I did know was that it would be an audience full of fellow human beings, and that that the goal was initially connection, because I'm looking for my tribe to help me, not the delivery of information, and that people tend to connect if you have a nice balance of conviction, objectivity, and grace. And if you're weak on any of those, then you might have some people like connect to it, but your hit rate is going to be a lot lower. Right?
So connection, objectivity, and grace.
Conviction, objectivity, and grace with the goal of connection, right? Versus delivering information.
It's interesting.
And so then, the scientist in me, and usually I make people come to the workshop to learn all this, Eric. I think this is the first time I've disclosed it.
Because what I'm fascinated by in this one is, and the reason I think it's interesting is from a storytelling standpoint, a lot of what you're talking about from a pitch standpoint is about pitching it verbally or sort of those ways. I'm listening to it thinking about when people are writing the introduction of their book, or they're writing the descriptor, or they're doing their podcast promo or whatever it is. There's a similar sort of thing about this concept of like getting people invested in what this is. And that those sort of things, it's just hearing in the back of my mind and listening to you thinking about it, it's like people oftentimes have this, they sort of underplay the beginning. Right? They underplay it because they're like, well, this is just to start, and then everyone's going to do the rest. And I think what's interesting about saying what you're talking about is that's sort of the whole kit and caboodle. Getting people to do those things gets the rest. I always tell people is like, listen, when someone's bought your book or they've downloaded the first episode of your podcast or they've come to your event, they basically have only committed to the first 10 minutes. They can always bounce. So how do you get people connected to that? And it's interesting hearing you talk about those sort of things as the pieces that'll do it when you're hooking someone, right?
The initial connection, and it plays out whether it's a video or audio or live speech or written, it almost doesn't matter. I mean, you can then refine it based on how people are reacting and connecting to it, but very quickly you need to get out there and be telling it to other people. I mean, with everything, again, it's about going to market, right? And, now that I do a lot of public speaking, I'll meet a lot of people that want to be public speakers, as you probably do with they want to be published authors, right? Yeah. And I always say, well, go out there and start speaking in public, because it doesn't count if you're doing it in your bathroom, right? And then you'll get a sense of it. You don't have to have the perfect speech, but have, a reasonable speech. So, again, you craft that first story, you use those universal languages, you start telling it, looking for connection points. You realize you're conscious that the goal is connection, that attention is a gift, right? And that, you use this scorecard, which I'll use in when I'm judging for pitch contests and working with entrepreneurs, which is I'll point to someone else in the room and tell them to tell me the story that the entrepreneur just said. And usually the audience actually is, a very highly curated audience that's, very well informed and usually has more of an awareness than the average person of whatever's being talked about, because I predominantly will be a tech entrepreneur. And when they stumble, the speaker or the entrepreneur gets it. And I'm like, and objectively, what you're trying to do is get the story to leave the room.
Interesting.
Very few people write a check or sign a contract or join your company from the first story, right? Very unlikely necessarily that those believers or the tribe that you need are necessarily in the room or at the grocery store or the dry cleaner or the subway where you're telling the story. But if it can leave the room, right, then it goes viral. This is the analog viral, right, which I've used always. I'm actually not as well versed on the digital viral, ironically, because the analog works so well for me.
Have you had any really good stories that happen when you basically asked the audience for this one? Has there ever been a time when they pitched it better than the entrepreneur?
No, not yet. Right? It'll be interesting to go back maybe to some of the people that I taught the first time and teach it. I haven't really had the opportunity to do that as much because I've been trying to spread the word to as many. But usually when people have that experience, they get it. And so say by the fourth or fifth, they start because they had time to start tweaking and learning. Right. But the main thing is that when they see it and get it and they're like, and if they know that their scorecard is around the story leaving the room, then they know how to test it. And I'm like, look, test it with your boyfriend or girlfriend or your parents. It doesn't matter. Any reasonable human being should be able to export that story for you.
It's interesting.
And keep refining it until they do. And that they want to.
Right.
So they both have to want to and be able to.
Right. That's interesting. And it's a simple thing too, because I think we oftentimes don't realize, I talk about this a lot. We don't think in outcomes. What is the outcome of this?
Yeah.
And I think what you're framing here a little bit is that the first conversation is always about that connection to have a second conversation or the third or the fourth, or to your point, the story leaving the room. And I think if you frame that as a type of story, as a sort of a portable story, it frames the way you tell it differently. I think there's one of the things I remember is that someone said that one of the best places to learn how to get better at storytelling is watch preachers, priests, rabbis.
Great,
they're really great because that's sort of what they're designed to do is go forth and spread the word. But they like get really good at those sorts of like repeating patterns, using common story elements and things like that it is. But that's right. Their goal is to get you to talk about it after when you're having donuts after the service.
Yeah, and as you were saying, sort of in the very beginning of this section of the podcast, it is like a tremendous superpower once you get good at it. Mm-hmm. Because we live in a narrative-based reality, so the question isn't, did the tree make a sound when it fell if no one was there to hear it? The question is, did the tree make a sound or even exist at all if no one talks about it and if the story doesn't spread? Right? And so literally, if you are a compelling storyteller, you own the future, you own reality, even if it's a lie, right? And that's some of the danger when we see like with, the rise of authoritarianism or any of those things and the importance of the First Amendment, right? It's like he or she who controls the story has tremendous power and controls reality. And having been to 52 countries over a span of 30 plus years, I've seen maybe the beginnings of the end of 3 democracies firsthand.
Wow.
So like I was in Venezuela in 91. I was in Europe starting in the late 80s. So all the Milosevic, Yugoslavia stuff, which for your listeners, Yugoslavia no longer exists.
Yeah, exactly.
It's Croatia and Serbia and Montenegro, which I've all been to, and Bosnia
Herzegovina.
Yeah. And then I was in Turkey in 2012. And so, it's that important. If we want to then translate it to tech and entrepreneurship, which I love translating everything to.
Of course.
Come on, look at Steve Jobs. Right?
Yeah.
He actually wasn't necessarily the best technologist, and I'm not sure if he even coded. That was like Wozniak, right?
Yeah, Wozniak did all the coding. I think that he was when they were working on it, he was a QA guy for Atari.
Yeah. Because I did Atari. Like I've been, in it since the 70s, Commodore 32, Commodore 64, Zork, Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
Oh, by the way, if you're into Zork, I have like an original.
Really?
Yeah. Still.
Super cool. There was 2 next door neighbors, Brian and Brian, and the 3 of us would play Zork a lot. And that was I still fondly look back on that one.
Yeah, that was my favorite game of all. And, I think they have it online now in the cloud. Yeah. Actually, if you want to become a good storyteller and hone your storytelling skills, that helped me a lot.
Interesting.
As a kid, because for those of you who don't know Zork was a purely narrative-based fantasy game. So it was actually a game based on storytelling. That's the way I looked at it.
There's a young man here named Emilio who told me the story about how he grew up in kind of a rough childhood, sort of challenging, in and out of different family homes through his extended family. And he said that he was like a 7th grader and basically was reading at a 1st grade level or so. And he convinced his grandmother over the summer to let him buy a series of video games that all had like 13 plus reading levels. And he was playing, again, at the time, these are visual-based games, but they had a lot of reading to them. His reading level went from, sort of 1st grade into like sort of sophomore level in high school because of that sort of thing. So I think there's something to this like engaged style reading, listening, learning like that I think is powerful. And it was interesting, I think, because there's like this pushback oftentimes that video games can't be that good for us. They're not helpful. But I think in the right way, they certainly can.
In moderation, they are, like many things, right? Like there is even a scenario in which drinking water is deadly.
That's right.
And so in moderation it is. And at the time, when I was big into video games, it couldn't help but be moderated, because you might have your consoles, and you need the TV. Your family was not going to let you commandeer the TV, or you'd be at the pizza joint playing Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man on the table. You couldn't stay in the restaurant all day.
That's right.
Or if you had your Commodore, or then eventually the Apple, it was just you had to basically moderate. in a way that now it requires more self-discipline.
Right.
But I think, all the technology and the games and the apps and the content, very powerful and very useful in a variety of ways, including coding, right? So I'm also a big advocate on everyone learning to code, even if you have zero interest in being a professional coder, just like I'm a big advocate, and not just for selfish reasons, on everyone learning my framework and the entrepreneur and creator skill set, because I feel like it's the skill set of the future. I mean, you don't learn to write just to be a New York Times bestseller.
Right.
And then around the coding, one of the reasons why I say it, and it actually goes back to storytelling, is that coding is a form of storytelling. It's a very precise form of storytelling, right? And then the computer tells the story in exactly the same way over and over and over again until you literally affect reality. And when you learn to code, you realize that, even if it's subconscious.
I learned a lot. I'm a reformed lawyer.
I know.
Well, but it's interesting. My co-founder and roommate was a really great developer, and so he taught me, some of the basics. Not that I could do anything dangerous, but I had a GitHub and I could look for bugs and stuff like that. But it was interesting. It's about writing instructions, in some ways. In both, I was a corporate lawyer writing legal instructions, and he was writing operation instructions. But I think there's something interesting about being able to write in a way that is informative or gets the right point across.
But it's also instructions to what? So you're like with anything, and so it goes back to what I was saying, which is the first step is the dream. So it's instructions to a certain result, right? Then
an outcome.
Yeah. Then that, right?
Yep.
And you're looking for, that ultimate outcome. And then once you figure it out and can tell that story in just the way to get that outcome, then the computer will tell it exactly that way forever and ever until someone changes something in the ecosystem, like the operating system or something, right?
So I want to make sure you cover two things before I know you've got a busy. I'm still thankful you came in, but I want to make sure. So two things I wanted to talk about a little bit. I think before we do, one is I want to chat a little bit about this. It's really interesting because you have a technology mindset, perspective, experience. You've been in, big tech, you've been in, cutting edge frontier tech and things like that. And yet here you are sort of talking about the power of storytelling, the power of innovation and these sorts of things. What is it like it feels like we've gone from an extreme where it was nobody knew anything about tech to where everyone, got too wrapped up in the tech. And now you're talking about more about the story, the imagination, this sort of dream around the innovator. Yeah, the human part of it. How has that sort of changed for you? And how do you see sort of the future as innovators not necessarily needing to be technical per se? They need to be sort of future aware and being able to sort of describe that future.
Well, they never needed to be technical. I think it was something that was promoted for whatever reason, and everyone drank the Kool-Aid. But, I know people that originally taught themselves to code on paper. That goes to the storytelling aspect, right? Because they didn't have access to a computer in the beginning. And so to me, it's never been that way, but the advertising made people think it was. Personally, going through this whole, experience, it's I sort of feel like I'm, at this point in my life where I'm able to be completely and wholly myself all the time. Every part of me can just be on full display, from my techie side to my creative side to my spiritual side. I just, was able to finally convene all of them and package it into something that is so authentic for me. It just feels really great, you know? But it's this moment in time. It's this moment in time. So, a lot of things had to change with society and mindsets and people catching up to technology, to, spirituality being more pop culture, all those things. And it's been, a great time to be alive, but it was always that for me. I just was forced to segment it. So I'll give you an example. when I was at Cornell, and I don't know if we were on air when we were talking about this, but it was, electrical engineering, but it was also pre-med, econ, and statistics and other things, right? And I knew that, I would continue to be an entrepreneur, so I wanted the business side of things. And back then, majors were very siloed.
Right.
So when I finished the requirements of electrical engineering, I applied to Cornell again in junior year to the College of Arts and Sciences as an econ major and got accepted a second time. Very few people know this. So I have the honor of having been accepted to Cornell twice, and I was still able to graduate on time.
Really?
Now they have mashup programs, but that was the only way I could do it.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah. That's fascinating.
And so to me, it's just a lot easier to have that all convened. And I think it's going to be so powerful for our future. And that the key skill set is going to be the skill set of like being a creator and creativity. And what I mean by that is not so much painting or music. What I mean is, again, going back to taking your imagination seriously and feeling that you have a basic process to turn things that you imagine into reality and to make it useful and valuable to society or a market or whatever. Everything else is being automated and replaced by technology and computers, but I think that aspect can never go away.
It is fascinating. I think, it's this, I think, again, I still think that you're at this, again, unique place where you have these forces that you can uniquely bring together that I think it's fun to hear. And maybe before we were talking about this sort of, I want to call it like, it's almost like a show now that you're bringing together. Tell a little bit about that. 'Cause I was inspired by, as I said, one of the things when I studied all these creators, right? We studied all the Forbes 30 under 30 to see what are the things that they did. Because it's the people that succeed today are creating things earlier, but they're not necessarily starting companies. And you're creating an experience, I guess, is maybe the best way to think about it. And it's one of the things that we saw is that people are creating events or conferences, is that power of bringing people together, and that shared experience is one of the powerful ways that people can, again, demonstrate their purpose, share. So tell me a little bit about this and how it's been in manifesting for you and changing for others.
Yeah. So, like for the framework, I don't just do lectures or workshops. I mean, I do that, but, what's really exciting to me is taking the framework and creating content and experiences around it that people can connect to and understand, what the principles are, that are fueling it. And because, I have this dream that skill set, the entrepreneurial skill set, is as well known as reading, writing, and math worldwide. It had to also be universal. So, part of my inspiration has been Hamilton, and what's done with regards to the origination of our country and the story of our founding fathers. Schoolhouse Rocks.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes.
Conjunction junction.
Yes.
What's that function? And looking at various things, muses like that. Also, I went to like a Lady Gaga concert and looking at what Beyonce does and the confessionals of reality TV shows, which basically is where they go into the room with like a white background and give you the backstory of what just happened or what's about to happen, and some aspects of TED Talk and show and tell. So, I created this whole like experience around the framework that drew upon all those elements, and I debuted it in Chicago a couple of months ago, and it was sold out, and people loved it. The audience ranged from 18 to 78, and it was almost equally half male, half female, and maybe 15% were techies or entrepreneurs. And so it was great to see the fulfillment of that dream and that people got it. You know what I mean? They understood the framework and the process when it was presented to them in that way. And they got the importance of it, and how it could be applied to, transforming or innovating your community or school or government.
Yeah. It is a powerful medium that I think people don't realize. Like, there's this, it's funny, right? Like, I think everyone's going so digital, and to your point about going analog, but I think the power of creating shared experiences is huge.
Yeah.
And it's, I think that concept of like designing an experience that makes people feel special, connected, all those sorts of things is interesting. And I think, again, plays on your ability to tell stories, but it's not only like, in that case, sometimes to tell stories, but to experience the story. You're actually are like making the story and part of it, which is that medium itself of events and conferences and shows and experiences and theater is, I think, something that I think is, it's an amazing one that I think people don't always appreciate how brilliant, great event creators and imagineers are.
Or live shows,
right.
And how hard it is.
Yes,
oh my God.
yes.
Thank God I'd never done one before until that one, because I would have been like, okay, I'll debut it in 2020. I had to executive produce and write and direct. And then I also had cast it for other people and as the dreamer, the storyteller, the whatever, as well as starring in it myself. I was like, ooh, thank God.
Yeah,
ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the fact that I, did that in a few months was crazy. But on the flip side, it's been awesome because now I have this whole tribe of other story makers and filmmakers and directors, and it's been super cool. I hung out with Warrington Hudlin a few months ago. He did Boomerang and House Party.
Right.
Yeah, it's just that alone was worth it. You know what I mean?
Awesome. Exactly. That's a great story to add to your repertoire. It's amazing.